On the Sunday of Zacchaeus, the Russian Orthodox Church celebrated the feast of the new martyrs and confessors of the Russian Church. The world will in all kinds of ways try to claim that the time of confessors and martyrs belongs to those first 3 centuries of the Christian Church. It was during the Roman pagan period that Christians were martyred. And we have images of the Colosseum. We're reminded of those souls who were cast before lions and gladiators and lost their lives in this way. But historians tell us that, in fact, in the 20th century, more Christians were put to death in the USSR under the atheistic communists than in the entire first 3 centuries of the Church. It's an extraordinary statistic to get our heads around, that the 20th century saw the greatest number of Christian martyrs of any century. And of course, around the world, even today, many Christians in the Middle East, in many Islamic countries, are persecuted, tortured, and lose their lives. But this feast focuses on those who gave their lives under the communists in Russia. And the world will tell us that martyrdom, Christian martyrdom, is a thing of the past, that it is something that belongs in history. And if we allow this falsehood, this lie, to take root in us, we can be misled and we can lose sight of what's really happening. Today, if you walk the streets of Russia, if you go to a Russian Orthodox church, you will walk by, you will sit alongside, you will stand beside and worship beside people who have experienced persecution, people who have seen and known loved ones dragged away and disappeared. When I was in Moscow 2 years ago, a priest showed me photographs of his church. The communists had been around with hammers and they had defaced it and destroyed the iconostasis, they had destroyed icons, they had hammer-blowed the walls. It looked barely more than a barn. And yet over the years that faithful priest had restored it, and now it is a thriving community. And when I worshipped there, I was so aware of the elderly people there who had lived through that experience, who knew what it was to be a persecuted church in this world. And they are alive. They are in our world. They are around us today, these persecuted Christians. The martyrs of the church, we are taught, are not victims but victors. Theirs is a victory over the world. All of us, of course, want to be safe. All of us have a longing to live a long life, a healthy life. The world convinces us of so much, and yet these martyrs understood that their faith in Christ, their faith in God, was worth more than any of this, and they overcame even the natural inclination to survive. For their faith in Christ was stronger than any impulse, any desire, anything that the world had to offer, even life itself. And so theirs was victory, and they are the victors. And all Christians, every one of us, is called to be a cross bearer. The way of Christ, the way of Christian discipleship, is martyrdom. We are all called to reach resurrection through the road of Calvary. We are all called to take up our cross. Now, for many of us here in the West, particularly at the moment, we are not required to shed our blood for Christ. So we may say, how can I be a martyr then? How can it be martyrdom if I am not being put to death? Well, in fact, a number of the fathers talk about a living martyrdom, a bloodless martyrdom. They say, when we patiently endure our sufferings, when we patiently endure our struggles, when we try to forgive, when we humbly accept the hardships of this world and this life, when we put to death the old man of desire, the old man who always wants his will and his way, then we are entering into this living martyrdom, this experience of living martyrdom. Many Russian martyrs, of course, experienced similar deaths. So many tens of thousands were shot, so many tens of thousands were drowned, strangled, so many were starved to death in camps, so many were thrown from cliffs. There are places in Russia where tens of thousands of Christians were flung to their deaths over cliffs. And yet, despite this similarity of their deaths, we are called to recognize that there is something unique in every martyrdom. Every single individual that gave their life for Christ uniquely was tempted, uniquely had to overcome their passions, was uniquely tempted by the devil and the world to succumb to what the world demanded of him. And so each of our fears, each of our hearts and its unique condition is brought and faces martyrdom in a unique way. And though the world may appear or show or seem to see the same thing happening time and again, for every one of us it is a unique experience. It is unique to us, and God knows the uniqueness of that experience and the uniqueness of the condition of our heart. He recognizes and strengthens us in those moments. And all of us in some way, of course, are tempted to follow the world in different ways. The world tempts and calls us. It demands of us. When we look at the communist regime, the atheists who put so many Christians to death and persecuted them in such terrible ways, at the heart of their philosophy was a hatred of God. And it reminds us that in this world, regardless of the name, regardless of the title of the political organization, any humanistic, godless organization of mankind that seeks utopia, that seeks to end mankind's suffering through human philosophy and humanitarian ideas alone, will ultimately end in suffering. As history tells us, every such political system has. Without God at its heart, human organization is a rebellion. It seeks to fulfill man's worldly needs, worldly desires, worldly longings. It crafts and molds each of us, mankind, into something that fits into this philosophy of worldly fulfillment. It is godless, it is atheistic. And we must remember, of course, these Russians who faced this, they were ready. They laid down their lives because throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, they had gone on pilgrimages, they had prayed, they had visited church, they had suffered in all kinds of ways. And so when persecution came, they were ready. Just a couple of years ago, who would have imagined among us that the churches would have been closed here in the West? Look at how we responded. Look at our hearts. How did it impact on us? Those people who saw their churches closed in Russia had an inner life that enabled them to face it and to survive spiritually through this experience. We don't know how long our churches will remain open, and we know now how easily the world around us can demand that our churches close. We must develop an inner life that is able and ready to face whatever comes. We cannot take going to church, having the mysteries of the church available to us, as something we take for granted. We must develop this inner life, this spiritual life. We must draw close to God now, while, as in Egypt, the harvest was full, but a time of fasting would come, a time of barrenness in the land. So too, when things are good, when we have freedom, let us use it to develop our closeness to God, so that if the world turns against us, if we are called to any kind of martyrdom, we too will be victors.